Katie. We have The Haunted Bridge. We are on Chapter 14, Surprise Visitor.
Mr. Haley has been very restless, Ned reported. Bert and Dave are outside now, trying to look after the mountain lion. I should be helping them.
I'll stay here with Mr. Haley, Nancy said quickly. You go ahead. Before Ned could protest, she had moved quietly to the adjoining bedroom. The patient was sleeping peacefully. After Ned had donned a raincoat and left the cabin, Nancy tiptoed to a closet in search of warm garments. The only apparel available were a pair of slacks and an old blue shirt. While she was hanging her own wet clothes by a lighted oil stove to dry, she heard Mr. Haley tossing and hastened back to him. The man's eyes were wide open.
"Who are you?"
he asked in a whisper. I'm Nancy Drew, and I have come to help you. She tried to explain the situation to him, but Mr. Haley was too restless to listen. He raised himself on an elbow, motioning her to assist him from the bed. No, you must remain quiet, Nancy told him firmly. You must not get up until the doctor says you may.
But I have to. My lion will starve. How long have I been ill?
Now, don't get excited, Nancy said soothingly. Everything is all right. Your lion is being cared for by friends of mine. Just lie back and try to rest. Presently, Mr. Haley fell into a peaceful sleep. By the time Ned and the others came in, Nancy was able to report that she considered the patient well on the road to recovery.
That's good news, Ned said in obvious relief. By the way, you look great in Mr. Haley's clothes.
I'll bet I do, she laughed. As the storm subsided, the boys listened eagerly to her account of the day's golf match. Ned cheered Nancy by saying he was sure she would win the tournament. The other boys agreed. After the rain ceased, Ned set off for the ravine with Bert and Dave to take a look at the fallen bridge. They found that it had floated some distance downstream and was lodged against an old log. They returned to the cabin for ropes and tools, saying they were going to try to pull the structure back into place and anchor it securely. During the boys' absence, Nancy donned her own clothes. Then, thoroughly worn out from her strenuous day, she sat down in a chair beside Mr. Haley and fell asleep. She was awakened by a knock on the door and rose to open it. Before her stood a tall, handsome man who appeared to be about 30 years of age.
I beg your pardon, he said politely. Is Mr. Haley at home?
Yes, but I'm not sure he can see a visitor, Nancy replied. He was injured in an accident and is in bed.
Who are you? Who are you? The stranger asked in alarm. I had no idea anything was wrong, or I'd have come here before this. Mr. Haley isn't in grave danger, is he?
He's recovering now.
That's good, the caller said in relief. Do you think I might see him? My name is Wardell, and Mr. Haley is my uncle.
Nancy was taken completely by surprise. Recovering quickly, she invited the young man to come inside. Mr. Haley is sleeping now, she explained, but when he wakes up, he may be able to talk with you.
I'd rather not if you feel it would excite him, Mr. Wardell said anxiously. I think the world of my uncle. He practically reared me, and it was through him that I became interested in nature lore.
Nancy asked a few polite questions about Mr. Wardell's work. Although she knew he was a professor at Andover College, she decided not to mention this immediately or reveal her identity.
I came over to Deer Mountain Hotel this afternoon to see a young woman, he said. She had requested me to call on an urgent matter. Apparently it couldn't have been very important because she wasn't even there. Since I was near here, I thought I'd drop over and see my uncle. Please tell me about the accident.
Nancy told him how she and her friends had discovered Mr. Haley. She wanted to bring Margaret Judson's name into the conversation, but to do it as casually as possible. When Mr. Haley was injured, we were afraid he had no living relations, she remarked. There were no family photographs or other clues to their whereabouts. However, I did find a picture here in the cabin of a beautiful girl." Nancy took out the photograph of Margaret Judson and handed it to Professor Wardell. He stared at it without speaking. An expression of deep anguish crossed his face. From something Mr. Haley said, I gathered he knew this girl well," Nancy remarked. "Do you know her?"
"Could I ever forget her?" Wardell said with emotion. "Margaret Judson and I were engaged to be married, but—"
The man's voice faltered. Nancy watched with quiet sympathy as he fought to regain his composure. The professor went on quickly.
"I was away on a scientific expedition at the time. Margaret's house was destroyed by fire. Everything in it was lost."
"Everything?" Nancy inquired.
"Well, she did have a chest of jewelry."
Professor Wardell smiled grimly.
"Among other things, it contained the engagement ring I had given her."
"How fortunate," Nancy murmured.
"It was anything but fortunate. In her escape, Margaret lost the brass chest. She left a note for me at my uncle's cabin, saying that even though she loved me, she must break our engagement. I couldn't understand her actions then, and I can't now. Why should she refuse to marry me just because the ring was lost? I'd be only too happy to buy Margaret another one. The ring was valuable, I admit," he went on, "but I'm sure Margaret knew me well enough to realize I wouldn't blame her for something that obviously wasn't her fault. People's tongues wagged. People were gossiping. They said she set the blaze to collect the insurance. That was nonsense, because unfortunately the policy had lapsed. Oh, I hope nothing has happened to her."
Nancy was tempted to tell Professor Wardell that she believed Miss Judson was in the vicinity of Deer Mountain. But before revealing any information about the young woman, she decided to consult her father. "After you've visited your uncle a few minutes, I want you to come with me to Deer Mountain Hotel," Nancy said, "and meet my father."
"I'd be delighted to talk with him," the professor said, "especially since I want to thank him for being so kind to my uncle. I must confess, however, that I don't know his name, or yours either, for that matter."
Nancy enjoyed the man's look of astonishment as she replied with a smile. "I happen to be the girl who asked you to call at Deer Mountain Hotel. My name is Nancy Drew."
You're Nancy Drew?" Professor Wardell exclaimed. "Why did you send for me?"
"I found something which I think may belong to Margaret Judson," she replied. "I can't tell you any more now. You must first discuss it with my father." Ooh, I'll have to see what he's going to say.